Hello and welcome to Ka0s Tournament Podcast. I'm Fetch, and with me today is Kuma.
Yo.
And Neko.
Hey everyone.
So, we're going to be talking about something that's pretty contentious here. I mean, we've had a decent amount of spicy topics at this point, but this one, I mean, semi-recently has had fights started because of it. We're going to be talking about, is your deck cEDH, or are you playing cEDH? But, like, in order to get into that, we kind of have to define what is cEDH. And even that, as a definition, has some contention behind it. So I'm going to start with the basic definition that it's like you can't get any more stripped down than this, and then we can elaborate it individually from there. So, the most stripped down cEDH is Commander pushed to be as competitive as possible. And that's pretty much the basics.
Yeah, not to get all pedantic on you, like that's the most basic useful definition. I think the most basic definition is it a Commander legal deck? Then it's a cEDH legal deck. Are people going to be happy if you play it? No, but
saying it's a cEDH legal deck is saying that cEDH is a separate format, which technically it is not. At least not yet. Some people have had problems with that. I personally think that cEDH should stay a part of Commander for now. We can talk about
that's
this
a whole
more,
other podcast, man. That's an issue that kind of died years ago.
I think it should stay a part of Commander for now because there's a lot of benefit for it being a part of Commander. Because, I mean, there are people that have tried to split it off and it just becomes its own separate format. And that's okay. Conquest. That's not a bad thing. Yeah, Conquest. I mean, if people want to play Conquest, they can. But when you start to be like, oh, we're going to play our own separate format called cEDH, then you get into splitting sub-communities, and it becomes a whole thing. It's a problem. It's not a good thing. If you've ever seen what happens when, like, a game on Steam has a low player base, and then has a ton of different game modes, and then the queue times for each of those game modes is like 2 hours for a game that has matchmaking, you don't want to split the community. That is not the point of this.
Sure, but I think the community's already been split. cEDH and Commander are only the same in name and ban list at this point. I think even the people in the community do recognize them as two very distinct formats. And I'm not saying one way or the other is if they should be, but people look at them and people look at the players who play each one. You know, there is that distinct line in the sand in the community, if nothing else.
Well, and part of that comes down to if you bring a cEDH deck to a casual table or vice versa, it is not going to be a good time for anyone.
I don't know. They'll surprise you sometimes, though. Some of those, like when you're in the actual casual setting and that's the decks around you, they can kind of gang up on you and kind of actually put you in your place a little bit. Not often, but it can happen.
I mean, 1 in every 5 games or so. But, like, if you're playing where 1 in every 5 games it's a fair game, that's probably not a good thing to do.
Yes.
I mean, a lot of casual decks who just aren't running the interaction tools to deal with the cEDH decks, you could theoretically play against 100 of those and win quite a few games. You know, part of being cEDH is being prepared to deal with other cEDH decks. You don't see a lot of, like, Spell Pierce in regular Commander decks, but you do see it in cEDH a lot because you need to be able to hit those early powerful spells.
Well, that's the distinction, right? It's the mindset. With Commander, you have things like power levels. You have a lot more rule zero conversations where you are trying to define and create an environment where all the decks in the pod are as equal to each other as possible. And because of that, you have a lot of negative feelings towards decks like stacks or land destruction, heavy control, things like that that actively stop people from playing the game. And I think when you're looking at regular Commander, that's what people are looking at, right? It's a game they're playing. Their main objective is having fun. And not to say you don't have fun with playing cEDH, but when you sit down for cEDH and when you bring a deck, your mindset, which I think is a very definitive part of cEDH, your mindset is, I don't care what the other people are bringing, I'm just going to win, or I'm trying to win, right? There's no power levels because you're going for the win, right? There's no hurt feelings necessarily because of that. And I think that's something I actually really like about cEDH, and why I kind of play more cEDH than the Commander. You don't have to worry about those conversations. You don't have to feel bad about either bringing a deck that's too strong or bringing a deck that's too weak. You can just play the game. And people say, oh, the decks are repetitive and it's all this and that. But I honestly think sitting down at a table with a group of individuals who all have the same mindset, even if they don't bring the most optimized of decks, is a really big, it's just a really good part of the format, I think.
Yeah, and the difference between the most fringe of fringe cEDH decks and the best cEDH deck is massively smaller than the difference between the fringiest casual deck and the best casual deck. Like, it's not even close. Trying to balance casual games is a fool's errand. Like, I have never seen it done well. Someone's always playing a stronger deck than everybody else. And like my favorite definition of casual, though, I don't remember who said this, but I heard it some years ago. So the definition of casual deck is deck that doesn't beat mine. And I don't think a more true thing was said about casual decks ever.
Legitimately, the reason why I stopped playing casual and started playing cEDH is because I had people get upset at me for attacking them in a deck built around attacking people. And it's like, what is the point? Like, you're saying, no, don't attack. Just don't attack anyone at the table. And it's like, the whole point of this is to attack. Like, what do you want me to do? Just not play the game?
And now remember the Twitter meme, you know, when someone attacks you in cEDH and it's the clip from Game of Thrones where Tyrion Lannister's all, I will hurt you for this. Todd Anderson had a banger of a tweet the other day, too. He was saying something like, I can't play Commander because I don't have a meltdown every time someone attacks me for 2 and vow revenge on their dog's 3rd generation or something.
Jeez.
And I'm like, you know what, Todd? That's a little bit true. I'm sorry. Oh, my God. The amount of angry people get over taking 2 damage in a 40 life format sometimes just blows my mind.
And that's the thing, right? Like, I think there's the stereotype when looking at cEDH when you're only playing casual that everyone's sweaty tryhards and it's not fun. But by and large, I've run into more hurt feelings or more people being kind of all over the place, kind of snotty, kind of obnoxious in casual. And there's nothing wrong with casual. I still like casual. It's just very different.
Yeah, people can do what they want and get their enjoyment where they want it. But can I just say how much I hate the whole I'm playing for fun, therefore casual? Like, so if casual is fun, then competitive is not fun? Well, let me ask you guys something. Who do you think has more fun playing basketball, you or LeBron James?
Listen, all I have to say is I am only playing competitive to cause my own suffering and for no other reason, obviously.
Oh, clearly, yeah. You do competitive because you hate yourself, right? Because
Yeah,
you're a tryhard.
Yeah.
I mean, but think about it, though. Like, if LeBron James hated playing basketball hurt LeBron James, none of us would know who he is. Like, clearly basketball is an enjoyable activity for him, so he does it more than other people, gets better than other people, and yeah, it doesn't hurt. He's, 6'9" either. But, like... Yeah, like the people who are really good at something probably are having more fun doing it than the people who just kind of do it every so often with their friends on a Friday night, which isn't to say they're not having fun, but it's like, come on, you really think like these like professional athletes would play their sport if they hated it?
Either way, I think we've kind of gotten off the thing of what even is cEDH. I mean, we've talked about the difference between cEDH and casual and talked about that and how that is, but like for me, another big thing for cEDH, which for some reason is not unified in the community. I mean, it's the majority opinion, but there are some people that disagree with it, is that cEDH is a proxy format.
It better be.
Yeah. Basically, it's just so that we don't have to spend $5,000 to play the format that we want to play.
Mm-hmm.
And 5,000, you on monocolor?
Fair point. Yeah, it's the decks that people are running are really expensive because cEDH, you're running all of the crazy, restricted, really powerful stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know of a single deck that doesn't run Mana Crypt, and that's like a $200 card.
That's on the cheap end for some of the cards you'll see in the format. You think like Mox Dime and Gaia's Cradle, you're starting to get really up there, and those are it's rough.
Yeah, if Cradle isn't 4 digits, it's close.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Time Twister. Mm-hmm. Time Twister is an absolute staple. Like, not every deck runs it, but it is run in a lot of lists, and that is not a cheap card.
Should probably be running more lists, but I think people take any excuse they can to cut that card because of the price tag.
I don't think it's a price tag. I think it's the conversation around wheels as a whole.
Wheels are scary. A lot of people don't like wheels. A lot of people really like wheels. That's a conversation for another time, but either way, Time Twister is absolutely one of the cards that you see a lot in our format. And if money was an issue, you wouldn't be seeing it that much. Or this could only be played by people who are like millionaires.
Yeah, you don't want to be Vintage here, which has like one sanctioned tournament a year with like 30 people.
Yeah, I couldn't afford any deck in this format if I couldn't just print out the cards.
I mean, I'm an old man and bought a lot of stuff when it cost significantly less, but like, yeah, if I lost everything, I'd never get it back.
Yeah, proxying makes the format accessible, especially for people who are coming in wanting to try it out. I don't know if it defines cEDH as a whole, but it's definitely something you see in the community, especially in tournaments. And that's the debate in the tournament scene, whether or not proxy should be allowed. A lot of online tournaments allow it, like us. Other more local tournaments don't allow it. And I can see both ways. I do like the implementation of things like playtest cards. I think that's kind of a good workaround, a good middle ground for the local tournaments, where you have the most expensive cards. You can get a playtest copy. It's not a proxy, it's not official. You basically rent it for the tournament. You have to give it back at the end. But I like it. It helps, if nothing else.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with playtest cards. I just think that that's just calling a proxy by another name, though, like, in all honesty.
Yeah.
It basically is.
And if I can make the first, like, semi-hot take of this podcast here, I would almost go as far as to say that if you are not okay with proxies in your game, event, whatever, you are not cEDH at that point. Like, you're playing Wallet Wars, and Wallet Wars might be a fun game for some people, but not for me. To me, cEDH is about playing with the cards, not about, making people spend new car money on a 5-color deck. And I understand one notable exception to this. I do understand stores who are trying to make money, having some kind of like fee for the playtest card or something, or limiting the proxies to a certain amount of cards to cover that, because they know nobody's going to walk in and drop $1,000 they can play in a tournament. But, they do want people to still buy the $20, $30 cards that they need. So like with that exception, I really think if you're anti-proxy, you're not playing cEDH. If you have that mental block, I'm sure you have many others that are keeping you from optimizing how you're playing the format. But that's a slightly different topic.
Well, I disagree with the idea of not allowing proxies personally. And I personally think that every tournament should be full proxy friendly for cEDH. But I do understand when local game stores are like, okay, we're putting a 20 proxy limit or whatever number they put for it. And it's like, okay, I get it. I don't agree with it. And I hate when people are like, no proxies whatsoever. But I understand for local game stores having that limit on it, especially for some of them where it's like, yeah, it's not an officially sanctioned format, but they're scared of Wizards of the Coast being like, grr, arg, and getting them in trouble. But like, proxies just make it so much easier for people to play the game.
Mm-hmm. And you're playing against the people, right? Which you want to do. You're playing against the people. You're not playing against their decks per se. You want equal footing, right? And so for me, and this is going to be my hot take, I actually don't play with proxies in my decks. I only play with cards I own in paper, but I do that because I play in events where I can't play proxies. So I don't want to get myself in. I want to be ready for those kind of events too. I want to play best with what I have. With that in mind, I don't have any problem with anyone who does play with proxies. In fact, I'm a-okay with it. I want you to do it.
Yeah, you just deal with the realities of your local scene.
See, I am on the opposite side of that spectrum. I have multiple decks that are full proxy. Like, not a single, I mean, other than the, like, basic lands or whatever going behind them, it's like, okay, maybe there's 1 or 2 real cards in there, but the vast majority of the deck is proxy. I have other decks where it's like, it's closer to a 50-50. But for me, I don't have the spare money to go out and drop 1,000 on a bunch of cardboard, even though it's a deck that I love.
If nothing else, though, like, do you really expect people to buy 5 mana crypts? Can I buy 1 and then proxy it?
That's what I do. Yeah, I buy 1 and then I switch it between the decks if I need to.
I have never met anybody who's not okay with that.
Yeah.
Like, everyone I've met who hates proxy is still like, well, if you own the card and, you could show me, then I don't really care.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody expects you to buy 1 of each dual land for all of your decks.
Yeah,
like,
no,
literally nobody expects that.
That's wild. But it does, like, for me, it does affect my gameplay, right? Because I don't own a Mox Diamond, I don't own a Gaia's Cradle, I don't own most of the duels. I only own one that I won in a tournament, right? So it's like, in some cases, I do miss those pieces. I can't play Turbo because I don't have some of those pieces, so that kind of brings me into the mid-range corner, which is fine with, I like mid-range, but so I guess that's something to keep in mind, though, with cEDH, right? Does playing with proxies or not change what cEDH is?
I'd say it does, but that's because I think if someone is having their gameplay being hampered by their financial situation, then you are not playing against the pilot at their peak.
Yeah, I don't want to win games because I'm 15 years older than people and, like, remember when dual lands cost like $30.
Mm-hmm.
Like, little humble brag here. I remember paying $35 each for my underground season, being like, man, if I'd been a little more patient, I could have got them for $33.50. And, like, how good for me, but I don't expect other people. I'm not going to then, like, stand on my $35 underground seas. I mean, for many reasons, but I'm not going to stand on my $35 underground seas and be like, well, you need to save up and buy $900 underground seas, or else you're not a real Magic player. Like,
Kuma,
I didn't do that. I don't expect people to do that.
how would you like to double your money real quick?
Double? You mean like multiply by 30?
Yeah, I'm just saying, I can double your investment real quick.
Yeah. Thanks, Nico. You're a pal.
Willing to take those off your hands.
Yeah.
But with us all agreeing about, like, yeah, proxies allow people to play the format, and we're talking about all these expensive cards and all this stuff, I think we should move on to, okay, what are the decks that go around these cards? Obviously, there's a handful of these powerhouse cards, and we run pretty much all of the powerhouse cards, all of the crazy stuff. You run your pretty much all the legal mocks, I think, depending on the deck.
Tantalite doesn't really see play.
True. I mean,
but yes.
Yeah, I don't really count that as a mox. I know it has the name, but power level standpoint. But yeah, you run all of the really good mana acceleration. Like, I think one of the biggest differences between cEDH and casual comes from mana acceleration, where casual is like land acceleration is the key, and there are very, very few decks in cEDH that run land acceleration.
Yeah, I have a friend for a while who, like, whenever someone would hand him their casual deck and say, "Can you help me make this better?" Without even looking at it, he would say, "Lower your curve, add more ramp," and then he'd flip the deck over and be like, "Yes, exactly that." Like, it's just kind of the difference, and people aren't really worried about speeding to their 6 drops. You know, they're like, well, on turn 5 or 6, I'll play that. Maybe 4 if I drew my Soul Ring. It's just kind of a different mindset. Like, they're not as concerned with optimal mana, optimal ramp, hitting things by a certain turn. They're just like, I want to play my cards and have enough lands and maybe some ramp to do that. The ramp tends to be more color fix and less like actual speed. Like something like Chromatic Lantern is huge in casual, and like cEDH players won't touch that with a 10-foot pole because it's not good enough.
Yeah, with cEDH, pretty much our land counts are way lower and our artifact counts are way higher. I think the highest you'll see a deck go is typically around 32 lands for cEDH. And I think casual is more like 38.
36, 38.
Yeah. It's pretty fair. It's pretty fair. And there are exceptions. I have like high power Azusa that runs like 41, but I mean that deck's all about hitting land drops.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, basically yes.
There are some decks where it's like this is a deck that is built around lands, like Kodama Sakashima.
Ashley the Pilgrim runs 99 lands. I mean, if you build it wrong.
But like Kodama Sakashima is a higher land count because the deck's basically built around lands, among other things. I'm trying to remember if there's any other. Is Tatiova?
That's a Tatiova turns deck. Hullen, that might run a higher land count. I'm not sure off the top of my head.
Hullen runs about 31.
Okay.
It should probably run more than that.
But yeah, basically our land counts are way lower, but our artifact count is way higher on average.
Mm-hmm.
We pretty much run. Even the least ramp-based decks run at least like 4 artifact ramp pieces on top of mana dorks.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of other ramp-based decks are in the 10 to 20 range when it comes to specifically artifact ramp.
Yeah, I'd say most cEDH decks are about 45 to 50% lands and ramp.
Yeah.
Like roughly half your deck is either making mana or speeding you up at making mana.
Yeah.
And all of those artifact ramp pieces are, unless they're a combo, they're 2 mana or less.
You get some 3. You do see some 3 every once in a while. That's a combo piece, though.
But it's a combo piece.
Yeah.
Yeah, which 3s do you see that aren't combo pieces?
Relic of Legends, which is a combo piece in a lot of cases.
Okay, that's to say, yeah.
Well,
Bloom Tender, or not Bloom Tender, Faber Elder.
Some decks, do like to run that just as a value
but, like,
piece.
That's the exception, like, for sure.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's anything else.
Pretty much just Relic of Legends. And that's only because it's 3 mana that taps for 2.
Yeah.
Or effectively taps for 2.
That can tap for a lot more than 2.
It can. 2 is the baseline, pretty much.
Honorworn Shaku and Godo, that taps for 3 guaranteed pretty much.
Well, and you do also have creature-based ramp that not all decks can run, but the decks that can run typically do at least run a handful. Birds of Paradise is pretty much an evergreen deck.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that, we pretty much have combos. It's like our basically we've got lands, we've got artifacts ramped, which also has a handful of creature spells that typically the creatures are either like 1 mana dorks, 2 mana dorks that tap for a lot, or they're stuff like Treason Soaker, where it's a decent investment to get out, but once you get it out, it gets you a ton of mana.
Yeah.
You could argue that Seaborn Muse is kind of in that range, but Seaborn Muse is a little bit weirder.
If you're running Seaborn Muse, you built your deck to make you silly amounts of mana.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And then basically we go, okay, either I'm running a combo piece, a stacks piece, which we can talk about a little bit, or some kind of value engine, typically.
Mm-hmm. And that's kind of the thing, right? Like, because you're playing CDH, you are playing to win, and in order to optimize your chances of winning, you need to make your deck as streamlined as possible around your strategy, which is why you see a lot of uniformity in the decks that are played and and the good pieces that are in there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I kind of want to make a point here about that. So we say, CEDH decks are optimized to win. All right, well, what does that mean? So the way I like to think about this is you're in a 4-player game, right? Assuming, equal pilot skill, equal luck, equal deck power, you should win on average about 25% of your games, right? 1 out of every 4. So to me, if you're cEDH, you need to be able to win roughly 25% of your games or better against a typical pod of cEDH decks, player skills, and luck. To me, if you're playing a deck that has like a 15% win rate against cEDH decks, I mean, is it a cEDH deck? It's a lot closer to a cEDH deck than Arcades Sabbath Defenders Tribal. But if the goal is to be competitive and to win, and you're winning at about half the rate you should expect to be, are you really playing cEDH? I mean, to me, no, but I'm sure people are going to disagree with that.
No, I think I agree with.
Well, and that gets into the idea of high power versus cEDH and where does that line get drawn. And I think part of that is stuff we've already talked about with your artifact count, which the thing is, a lot of this, it is deck specific. And so we can't just be like, oh, you're not on this exact artifact count, therefore you have a bad deck.
No, but that's a pretty good heuristic.
Yeah, it's like if you're not running Mana Crypt and all of the good ramp pieces for artifact, then you, 1, should be if you're wanting to play cEDH, and 2, might need to look at this as a high power or more casual deck rather than a cEDH deck.
Honestly, if you're running Mana Crypt or even high power, like to me that's more mid power, but that's a different topic.
For some decks, maybe. It depends on whether you are countering artifacts. Which I'd said that we'd talk about Stacks later. Stacks is one of the few decks where you typically don't run as high of an artifact count.
Right, because you're shutting everybody else's off.
Exactly. So Stacks as okay. Most other decks in the format try to win as fast as possible. Stacks tries to make everyone else win slower. So that basically you can get your stuff up and running and then you can win out before them, not because you're faster than them, but because you've made them slower than you.
Yeah, here's how I like to think about that. If your deck cannot win on turn 2, maybe it can if it has some absolute like Rube Goldberg combination of magic cards. If your deck cannot win on turn 2 or somewhat reliably prevent other people from doing so, I think that automatically knocks you into high power.
I disagree. I'm
trying to think of a deck that's legit cEDH that either can't win on turn 2 or can't reliably stop people from winning on turn 2. And
okay,
what reliably means, of course, is up to some debate. But like you're probably running like at least 10 plus cards that have a chance of stopping a turn 2 win if it happens.
If we're including like counter spells as well as stacks pieces, yeah, I'd agree with that.
Well, not even necessarily counter spells, something like a bounce spell could count for that, or even Swords to Plowshares possibly. But like if you're not running at least 10 plus pieces of cheap interaction or having the ability to win on turn 2 without a Rube Goldberg assembly of cards, I think you're probably a high power deck at best. I'm trying to think if there's any exceptions to that, and I'm having a hard time with it.
Yeah, there are some players who like to try to rely on other people to have the interaction. I don't think that's a good mindset, and I do think that leads to people playing a bit more jank.
I think it's a great mindset for some players who are very good at like managing a table and manipulating a table with like, how they talk and stuff.
Yeah, but
I'll tell you what, I've seen a lot of very high tournament finishes from very parasitic decks. I mean, if Ian can win 2 games with Gruul, I'm pretty sure, that was Ian's, mouth winning in those games more so than the raw power of Gruul. Like, I'm pretty sure he talked himself into some of those wins while playing a very, very parasitic deck.
Even the most parasitic decks, which parasitic decks basically, for those who aren't familiar with the phrase, you are playing a deck that relies on other people stopping other people from winning.
Yeah, it's a deck that basically relies on your opponents to do some of the work. Like, you're not a deck that's gonna...
But even the most parasitic decks in cEDH still run interaction pieces. Like, looking at Yisan, which I would say, while not like hardcore parasite...
Oh, that's pretty parasite.
Mono green is one of the most parasitic you can get. Yisan still runs multiple pieces of interaction. You've got Collector Roof as a way to shut off people's combos. You've got like Beast Within. You've got Force of Vigor.
Yeah, I think Yisan probably fails my 10 pieces of removal threshold, or 10 pieces of interaction threshold, but I mean, it is definitely thought of as cEDH. I think you're really handicapping yourself with that one. I don't think you see it nearly as much as you used to, but yeah, I mean, like, that's an extremely parasitic deck.
Well, if you're including stacks pieces, though.
Yeah, I do. As long as they're like 2 mana or less, I include them, yeah.
Chalice of the Void, Sphere's Resistance, Thorn of Amethyst, Null Rod, then you've got Collector Roof.
Okay, maybe it doesn't fail my 10 pieces, but it's probably pretty close.
Yeah, so even the most parasitic decks you can get still run a lot of interaction and a lot of ways to slow people down, at the very least.
Yeah, and I think that's the distinction, right? Like, there are still people who think, I'm going in here with none of these pieces, on stack, proactive, nothing, and they're expecting to be able to win. And I think that's kind of that hang up between high power and cEDH.
Yeah, I mean, even if you can win with that, like, we've all been in the game where, like, we were at the LGS or whatever, and we had 3 of us who wanted to play cEDH, and a 4th guy with a high power deck who's like, can I fill out your pod? And you're like, well, the alternative is we don't play. And the 3 of you, like, nuke each other for 6 turns, and then he, like, assembles Voltron and kills you.
Mm-hmm. And that's what you said earlier,
but,
right?
Like, he's not cEDH, though. He just, happened to, pick off 3 very weakened cEDH decks.
Well, and high power can win games against cEDH decks, but I think...
but you're heavily disadvantaged.
Yeah, I think the big difference between high power and cEDH is, as we're talking about, one, interaction. And if it's not interaction that you're giving up speed. Or consistency. It's like, you either are lacking interaction, you're lacking speed, or you're lacking consistency. Those are 3 things that you need for pretty much every cEDH deck.
I would say you need at least 2 out of 3 of those things to be a cEDH deck. At least 2 out of 3.
I would argue all 3, honestly.
There's some lists where it's like, yeah, their consistency... I'm pretty sure all of them have at least decent consistency. It's like, not every deck for cEDH has a 10 in all 3 metrics, but every deck is at least above a 5 in each metric.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah, if that's what you meant, then I agree. I was just talking, like, you can have a very inconsistent deck that, is capable of incredibly fast protected wins and, like, still call that cEDH. But, like, if you're going to say they're all at least a 5, we're talking about, like, the whole spectrum of commander decks here, then yeah, absolutely. You're probably going to have to be at least a 5 to be cEDH on all 3.
It's like every deck has at least 2 that are above a 7, and at least the last one is at least above a 5 in order to be cEDH level.
Yeah, sounds reasonable.
Which, as we're talking about numbers here, that's another thing that really separates cEDH and casual. With a casual table, you sit down and you're like, okay, what number are we at? What is our power level here?
7. It's always 7.
Yeah.
If you sit down at a cEDH table and people are asking you what's your power level, you are not a cEDH table.
My power level is yes.
You should not have the question of what power level is this deck? This deck should be as powerful as you can get. Like, there are some commanders where it's like, okay, can this get all the way? It's close. It's questionable. I'd put, like, Belby in that list.
Yeah, we can argue commanders, but, like, if you're not even maximizing the commander you chose, you are definitely not cEDH.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think what people have said, I think, Fetch, what you highlighted, those 3 factors are very important. And I think, Kuma, the percentage you mentioned, if I'm looking at trying to define cEDH, I think that those are the metrics to really look at. How tuned your deck is, how optimized it is to... I don't necessarily say it has to win quickly, but it has to be able to win consistently, right? Whether that's winning
something quickly.
Yeah, winning fast, stopping your opponents, right? and doing it 25 is like the average you're expected to win, right? You're looking at, 4-player pods, you should win 1 in every 4 games. I think for a deck to be considered good, you probably want to be able to get it to at least a 30% win rate, which can be hard in some situations. But I know we don't want to talk about too much about cEDH, or tournament cEDH, I should say. But when we're looking at that environment, it's something that actually has to go up a lot more. Like, you need at least probably a 50% win rate in order to make the cut to top 16.
Yeah, but realize that's a combination of like your skill, your opponent's skill, your luck, and your deck strength. Like, no deck in the format has an inherent 50% win rate, like not even close. But some combination of pilot skill and luck can put people there in a tournament setting.
Whenever you're talking about win percentage, there's one, player skill to be factored in. So like, if you're a new player who is just learning the format, don't expect yourself to have a 25% win rate or be like, oh, I'm not winning 25% of the time, therefore I'm not on a good deck. If you don't know the format, if you don't know what you're doing, and you're still learning the game, then you can be playing the best deck in the format and still be winning only 10% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
There's some amount of player skill to it, but there's also natural variance. So when it comes to tournaments, as we're talking about, you, one, have to be a really good pilot in order to win the tournament, and 2, have to have some amount of luck, or just be really good at manipulating the table.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, you have to have all 3 of those.
I would say, yeah, because you can separate people from the deck, right? Because there are good decks and there are good players, and it's like that scale, right? We were talking about one has to be pretty high, the other one has to be up there too. A good pilot can elevate an okay deck. I don't think the inverse is true, but they feed off one another. I think Magic is inherently a game of luck, but I think when looking at cEDH and most competitive formats, you are trying to make luck as little of a factor as possible.
I absolutely
you're
agree.
trying to, but it's always going to be there. And honestly, you have to get luckier in a cEDH game than you do in like 60-card Magic. 60-card Magic, you have to get luckier than one person. cEDH, you got to get luckier than 3 people. Now, luck's not the only factor, obviously, but
yeah,
if you get very lucky and someone else gets even luckier, well.
See, I've been watching the Modern Pro Tour, and I don't know, some of the luck those people have, I think it's a bit worse for them.
Well, if you won a tournament in any format, you probably got above average luck over the course of the day. Like, that's just the nature of the beast, right? I mean, like, you look like who has the highest win rate ever on the Pro Tour? Luis Scott Vargas or something in his peak had like a 70% win rate on the Pro Tour, which means he was losing a third of his games. And he was still spiking Pro Tours, though, because, like, it's a lot easier to put off a 14-1 streak when your, success rate is 70% than when it's 50%.
Mm-hmm.
But he still had to get somewhat. That one Pro Tour he almost went perfect on, he still got very lucky that day. Like, you have to get pretty lucky to win, 16, 70% coin flips in a row or whatever he did.
Well, and with cEDH specifically, I mean, one of the reasons why I love it as a format is because it emphasizes that consistency so much. Like, we are a 100-card singleton format that wants to be as consistent as possible and does a really good job at that. Like, my first card game that I played and like got into the competitive scene for was Pokemon. And Pokemon is actually really fast and really consistent, or at least it was when I played it. cEDH is the closest I've gotten to that in Magic. Now, I haven't played Legacy at all, and I know that Legacy is crazy and wild, but you, for certain lists, go so fast in this format and are so consistent because you're running as many consistency cards as you can. You're running all the tutors that are good. You're running all the draw engines that are good, at least that are available in your color, obviously. And you are trying to make your deck as consistent as possible in whatever its game plan is. And so while, yeah, there is some amount of natural variance just because Magic is a game that has RNG naturally built into it in every aspect of it, there is also limiting that natural variance using tutors, using draw engines, using all this stuff so you can see the cards that you want to see.
Yeah, and the thing I like about cEDH too is luck can actually kind of be a double-edged sword. We've all had that game where we had the nuts hand and the other three players kind of teamed up to smack us down. In 60 card, if you have the nuts hand, it's just way better than your opponents. You probably just win.
Yeah.
So, getting really lucky in cEDH isn't always the best thing that can happen to you.
But we've been talking a lot about our definitions of cEDH. We aren't the only people in this game. We aren't the only people in this community who have tried to define cEDH. And I think one of the things that people would point to when trying to define cEDH, and this caused some problems, is the cEDH deck database. The deck list database was very popular, and then a lot of people hated it, and now it's starting to reach an actual healthy point. I think it's close to it. It's not quite there yet, but I think it's close to it actually being a useful tool that isn't over relied on by the community.
Yeah, I think the turning point was Nexus no longer using it to determine what decks were allowed to be played. I think that was kind of the point where things started to get healthier.
Yeah, okay, for those who aren't aware of the deck database, one, I'd recommend looking at it. It's a great resource. But basically, it is a list of decks that are submitted by various users and chosen by I'll say council, even though it's not quite accurate of what it is, of players and community members to be on the website as what pretty much is the...
Yeah, this is where it gets tricky, because you want to say what defines cEDH, but they swear up and down that that's not what it is.
It is a sampling of decks for cEDH and is a good show of the variety of options that you have in cEDH. I'll say that. See, part of the reason why the website has had so much controversy around it is because there are some people that say if your deck is not on this website, it is not cEDH, and there are some people that say that there are plenty of bad decks on this website, and then there are some people that are like, this isn't even including the top lists of the format.
Yeah, I don't work for the database, but I would be shocked if the number one piece of feedback they get is, well, you put X on the website, why isn't my deck there? My deck is clearly better than X. If that's not the number one piece of feedback they get, I'll go find a hat in my closet and eat it.
Yeah. I honestly have so much respect for the people who put their free time into this, because, man, it must be a headache for them.
Oh yeah, it's a massive undertaking.
No matter what I say next year, they absolutely deserve our respect for all the work they put in, and they're trying to do something good, even if they don't always hit their goals.
Yeah, they go through hundreds upon hundreds of decks each review cycle, right? Major kudos to them and the work they're doing. And I respect what the deck list database is and what it's trying to do. With that said, I don't know if even they know exactly what they're trying to do, if that makes sense, for all the reasons that have been mentioned. And I think they've put themselves kind of in a lose-lose scenario. I love seeing the database. I love looking at it for the decks that are being played. Heck, I have fun and try to get my decks submitted on the database. I think it's still a useful tool, but I think it is one that back in its heyday was really good, but as cEDH has grown and developed, and as the pool of players and viable commanders has grown, it's kind of gotten tricky, right?
Well, and I think one of the things that is both a great thing about the database and a really bad thing about the database is they have a lot of lists on here that are different versions of basically the same deck. And so if you're like, okay, I want to build a Kenrith list, you can go onto the database, and there are, let me count them real quick to make sure I get this right. 5 different versions of Kenrith on the database. Sorry, not 5 different versions, 5 different archetypes.
Mm-hmm.
There are actually more than 5 different versions of Kenrith.
I mean, to be fair, you can build that deck a lot of ways and have it be good.
Yeah, I chose an extreme example. Kenrith, you can build literally any way you want, basically, and have it at least be an okay deck. But I think you have so much overlap of, it's like, okay, these, I'll say 70 cards are exactly the same across 20 different lists. And then it's just changing that last 20, which is one of the things that is a criticism that a lot of people have for cEDH in general. And I understand the criticism. There are definitely decks that don't follow that at all. And there are good decks that don't follow that at all. But you do have some amount where these are the best decks and these are the best cards in the format. If you're not running them, you should be. And what happened was, with the amount of decks that cEDH database was reviewing, basically you had a lot of decks that just got dismissed because, hey, you're not running this staple card. And it bred a lot of animosity towards it.
Yeah, and that's a big issue people have with the database, is they feel like if I'm not running Ad Nauseam in a black deck, I'm not making on the database. If I'm not running Chrome Mox and Mox Diamond, I'm not making on the database. And like, as somebody who submitted lists to the database, gotten a few on, had a few come off, like, there is some truth to that. They do have their biases. I don't think the biases are terrible. You know, do I think there are times they should have overlooked them? Sure, but I'm also biased as a submitter. But yeah, so there's a lot of that going on that people take issue with. But I kind of want to take the opposite tack from Neko a little bit. Neko's like, there should be more decks on the database. I'm kind of the opposite. I think the database should be smaller, like significantly smaller. And here's kind of where I'm coming from that. So the database themselves, they like to say a lot, you know, this is supposed to be a resource for players. Like, I'm assuming by that they generally mean new players, right? People who are coming to the format and want to see what it's about. So let me go on the database here and just pick a deck at random. You know, somebody goes to the website and they say, oh, okay, I'm looking through these decks. And you guys are going to pick apart whatever example I pick, but I'm going to go with Grolnok Self-Mill. You know, oh, that deck looks cool. I'm going to build that. Like, what percent of cEDH pods do you think have a Grolnok the Omnivore deck in it? You know, what percent of cEDH players do you think play that? Like, how many tournaments has Grolnok won? How many leagues has Grolnok done well in? I mean, to me, like, there's just a lot of traps on this website. Like, I'm not saying the deck can't do well and people don't enjoy it. You should feel bad if you play Grolnok. I'm just saying, people who are coming to the format, there's a lot of decks on this website that are kind of like traps that are, you're going to think, oh, it's on the website, it must be fine. And then you're going to lose like 90% of your games and be like, what's going on? I thought this deck was legit. It's a viable deck in the format. And it's like, well, on some level, yes. But, you know, honestly, if you're new to the format, you should probably be playing something like Thrasios Timna or some variation thereof, at least at first. You know, you want to move off of that, like, you know, level of deck, you can, but you need to know what you're doing. It's like, you need to learn the rules of the format, learn what the high end of the format is, learn how to play the high end of the format against the high end of the format. And then if you want to, you know, use that knowledge and try to, you know, play around the edges, you know, with other decks, you know, maybe have obscure advantages, you know, then you can do that, right? You should learn the rules before you break them. And I feel like the database in a lot of ways gives kind of a poor idea of what the rules are to a lot of people who don't know any better.
I somewhat agree. I will say, before I insult the frog, Grolnok is a sick deck.
I knew you were going to pick apart my example. I knew you were going to do it.
But no, I'm going to agree with you that it is actually, you're not seeing it very often. It's not like maybe 0.2% of tables or something like that. It is a niche deck, to say the least, and it is not the most powerful thing you can do in the format. It's a really cool deck, but it is niche. It is hard to use. It is pretty. It's not as complicated as other commanders, but it is not exactly like A plus B equals C. Like there's more complexity there, and I think something that I'm pretty sure they used to do that they don't do anymore is they would have lists like that in the Brewer's Corner, and they've kind of moved away from doing that.
Well, I think something else they did too is they had a separate section called recommended decks that was basically like, you know, the 15 juggernauts of the format. And they were like, you should probably start here. And then, you know, once you understand how some of these decks work, then you can move on to all the weird, unique stuff. And they stopped doing that because they really, really, really did not want to be seen as the arbiters of what is good in the format. They're like, the point of the database is not to say what the best decks in the format are. It's not to say what is cEDH and what isn't cEDH. And here's the thing about that. Like, you can say up and down that that's not who you are and that's not who you want to be. And you can even mean it. You can be 100% honest about that. But if everybody else looks at you to be that, congratulations, you're that. If everyone in the world bases what they think cEDH is off of what you put on your website, regardless of whether you think that's okay or not, whether you think that's what you're trying to do or not, you know, that is the state of affairs. It's kind of the same thing with the Rules Council, right? Sheldon and the rest of the Commander Rules Council say things like, I don't want to balance a ban list for a competitive format. And that's fine. I believe them. I believe they don't want to do that. I believe they're not trying to do that. But guess what? cEDH uses the Commander ban list. So on some level, they are doing that, whether they want to or not. And, you know, I feel like there's a lot of people trying to put their head in the sand about this, like who, you know, both on the Rules Council and on the decklist database. I think if they leaned into it a little bit more, they could create something that's better for everybody, but they just don't want to be that person. I understand why they don't want to be that person, right? The internet's a vicious place, but I mean, like it or not, on some level you are that, and acknowledging that might help is all I'm saying.
I think that when looking at the database, and I don't want to rip on the database because, again, I think it does a lot of good work. The people there work really hard. But
everything I say with love.
Oh, yeah.
And I know you do too. Go on, yeah.
No, I'm not saying you're not. I'm just saying that, again, I said it was like a lose-lose, right? Because it's so hard to find that balance of everything. Yes, you want to represent the best decks, but that's really hard to do with decks shift back and forth. I like a database as an example of representing the decks in the format and then letting people pick and choose. Because I think cEDH, more so than the decks, are the players. I think player skill will get you a lot farther. So showcasing a place where people can look at decks that better match their playstyle and then let them develop as a player, I think would be better off for the community. I agree with you, Kuma, that there is still that learning curve, right? People do need to practice, but I don't think people should be. It's tricky, right? Because you expect them to come in with some knowledge, but there's that learning curve if you're coming in from Commander as to how cEDH is different, especially that mindset. But now you have...
Yeah, just look at the Reddit if you want to see what that looks like.
Exactly. But now you have resources like cEDH Top 16, right? Where you can see the decks now based on not all statistics, not all tournaments, but at least a good sample size, right? You can see what decks are finishing well. You can see the decks with the highest convergent rate. So now that I think that the tools like that and people are making stats like that, I think the deck list database would actually be more free to be more inclusive of ideas.
That is a pretty good point because, yeah, EDH Top 16 is something we desperately needed and we got it. And I think it's filling some of the purpose that the database is trying to wash their hands of.
Well, and I think a lot of people are going to EDH Top 16 as like, oh, this is the new database. And in reality, they're just two separate things, and both of them are useful resources. And you shouldn't be like, oh, if it's not on the top 16, then it's not good. It can't be at all useful. And same thing with the database. They are both resources that are valuable to players.
Yeah, here's how I use the database, and I think a lot of people would have a lot less stress in their lives if they looked at it this way as well. You know, just my opinion. But I don't try to get on the database as some form of prestige or as some sort of like owner of a deck. If I'm trying to get a list on the database, it's because I want more eyeballs on it. I want more people to see it. I want more people to discuss it. I wanted more people to play test it. So like I've been trying to get Joda stacks on the database for the past couple of cycles, and they basically said no, we don't think it's better than existing options. I kind of see where they're coming from. I don't entirely agree, but I'm not trying to get it on there because A, I think it's the best stacks deck in the world. B, because I want the prestige of being the owner of Joda stacks. What I want it up there for is C, so that, you know, I can get more people talking about it and push the deck forward. So, you know, I can play the best version of the deck that I like. And I think if people looked at the databases, you know, getting my list on the database is a way to get more eyeballs on it. I think there'd be a lot less hand-wringing over what the database is, a lot less stress about why wasn't my list accepted. Like almost every cycle, somebody basically goes ballistic on those poor hardworking people in their Discord. And it's like, look, I've been there. I've been upset you didn't put a deck on there. I've been a little bit harsher than I probably should have been once or twice. But it's like, honestly, it should really just be about getting eyeballs on your deck.
Yeah, I agree. Well, and I think from a, I guess, user perspective, from someone who's not submitting, but from someone who is viewing the deck list, it is useful to see what other people are doing, what other options there are, being able to compare your deck to one on the database. And even to some extent, even though there are definitely some lists on here that I would not recommend to new players, and honestly, there are some lists that are very good that I would not recommend to new players. Like, I wouldn't recommend someone to pick up either of the Sisay lists if it's their first deck. They're complicated, they're weird, they do stuff that other people don't, and have unique combo lines that it sets them apart in a challenging manner.
Yeah, you should probably start with turbo or mid-range. I would not start at the stacks control end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, people...
That's the really weird execution end of the spectrum.
That's the weird part, right? Like, yes, there are definitely decks that aren't user-friendly for new players, but that's another contention point, right? How do you enter into the format? What are the best decks? And I don't think there's a clear answer, but I think that it's important for people to recognize that cEDH is different. cEDH, like I said, is a mindset, and it's going to take time to perfect that. So coming in with that open mind, I think, is most important. Understanding what makes cEDH, the factors that you're looking for, the idea that you are now playing to win as often as possible. That's going to, I think, do a lot better for you. And I think, honestly, if you're starting cEDH, you don't start by picking out a deck yourself. You start by looking at the community. Go online, YouTube, a ton of great content creators that you can observe. See how games play out. See how people are playing. See how the stack looks like. And then choosing, okay, I've seen this deck a couple times. I would like to try it. Then using resources like the decklist database to maybe find a version of the deck that you can like, and then going from there.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Well, and I think, well, one, I'm just going to give a preview. Soon, we're going to be releasing a series of videos talking about going from a beginner, either where you've never played Magic before, or at least never played cEDH before, and getting into the format, and what are some of the things that you can do, what are some weird niche things like specific phrases, like the idea of stacks decks or turbo Nas decks, and what that actually means, as well as just how can you go from someone who doesn't know this format to someone who is good at this format. And there's going to be a series coming out that will be coming out in little bite-sized episodes over the coming months, and hopefully that's a nice resource. But as you were mentioning, there are other resources available. Deck Database is one of them. EDH Top 16 is one of them. Once you know what you're looking for, I'd even say EDH Rec is one of them. But also YouTube, and going and looking at content creators, looking at, like, just finding someone that you like their style. I mean, we have videos that you can view There's Comedian, who's a great content creator. He's more focused on the tournament side. There's Eisenhertz, I believe is the name.
Mm-hmm.
Who?
Yeah, his stuff's pretty good.
Yeah, he does some great stuff. There's some of the bigger ones like Play to Win and Playing with Power, who they're more focused on creating, I'll say, rather than the educational side, the more entertainment side. And all of these things are good and great ways to introduce yourself to the format.
I would say that looking at someone like Play to Win or Playing with Power is a great place to start because they have that entertainment. So easier to engage with, easier to latch on to. They produce a lot of gameplay videos and do a good job kind of speaking about what's happening.
I mean, Play to Win is one of the big ways that I got into this format. I went on the gameplay pipeline.
I used to watch, this was back during COVID, Casually Competitive, who sadly I thought were coming back. I haven't seen them in a while though, but people like that, right, who were releasing the gameplay videos.
Well, and we also have some partner content creators here at Ka0s, where we think these are people that are putting out good content. You can go check them out as well. I'll try to have, I don't know how many links I'm going to have in the description, but there will be at least some links into the description as far as resources you can check out, YouTubers you can check out and see their content. But I think a lot of this comes down to really introducing yourself to what you're playing against. And from there, you can figure out, okay, how good is this? And ask other people. Like, if you're like, okay, where is this deck? How is this deck looking? There are people you can ask. There are Discord servers that you can go onto and be like, hey, is my deck good enough? What changes would you make to it? Where do you think this could go? And yeah, you're gonna have some people, regardless of where you go. I mean, I'd say the Ka0s Discord is a pretty good place where it's going to be mostly positive responses, even if it's a more saying, hey, this needs some work, this isn't quite up to snuff. It's going to be mostly positive. Not everywhere is going to have that. There's going to be places where you give out this thing and looking for advice, and they will be very harsh with you, and sometimes give bad advice on top of being very harsh with you. But look for a community where you can get people to like give you advice and help you with your journey into becoming a cEDH player.
And just add one thing to that. If you are going to look for advice about how to improve your cEDH deck. So I've been in the position a few times where, you know, because I had a list on the database or something, people have come to me and been like, hey, Kuma, here's my version of whatever you built. You know, what do you think about it? And it's kind of like, well, what am I supposed to say here? Like, without any additional context, if you're not telling me about your context, are you trying to play it in tournaments? Are you trying to play it with a group of friends? There's maybe like 10 decks between all of you. If you're not going to give me any information about like what you're trying to do with the deck, I don't know how to give you feedback outside of run my list. Like, my list is what I think is the best list for the deck. Now, if you have extenuating circumstances, you know, that might change that, I'm happy to try to work with that and help you. But the people who are just like, you know, hey, here's my list, what do you think? I'm like, I think it's not my list, and absent context, you should run my list. Yeah, it's like, so if you're going to ask for help, try to provide some context about what you're trying to do with it. And like what kind of decks you expect to face, or you're probably going to get a lot of people who don't know exactly what to do with you.
Well, and I'd say there are a lot of decks that do have a large variety of options for them. Atraxa is one of them. Corvold, that's one of my babies, and there's a whole lot of different. I mean, some of them I don't think are as good as the one I'm running, but there's some things where it's like, oh, I get why you're running that over what I'm running, and there are, I mean, even Blue Farm, one of the best decks in the format, has it where there are very much choices that you can make as far as like, okay, playing this card over this card for whatever reason. But there's also a certain baseline, and when you start straying outside of that, then you get more, I'll say, questioning glances over why are you running or why aren't you running whatever card. And I think that can be healthy as long as you're prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I realize if you're new to the format and you kind of like upgraded one of your high-powered decks, you're probably running a lot of very suboptimal cards, and you'd be ready to hear that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, cEDH, again, I'll say it is a mindset, right? If it's working for you, if you're winning games, right, you are defining what cEDH means to you. I think as long as you are trying to win and as long as you're winning, you're doing something right. And we've been talking about how all these different things within the community, different perspectives, even our own perspectives on the format, mean different things to each of us. Bring back to another episode, Kuma, very high on lands. Myself, I'm okay with a lesser land count, for example. But I would say we're both knowledgeable players about the format, right? So find your community, find your niche in it, find what does well from you, and go from there. And it's about putting in the time and just finding your space in there.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Listen, if you want to play the Frog, if you want to play Grolnok, go play Grolnok.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, let me be very clear here, because I know this is coming in the comments section. Every time I say something like a Grolnok example, people are always like, well, Kuma says you're not allowed to do X. No, you're allowed to do whatever you want, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea. Doesn't mean that's your optimal format experience.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you get to change the definition of a word because you want to do something and you want it to be called something it's not. So I'm not saying people aren't allowed to do whatever they want in cEDH. You can do whatever you want in cEDH, but are you real cEDH under certain conditions?
Mm-hmm.
If that word has any meaning at all, then yes, there are things you can do that are not cEDH. And that's not going to change.
It's the way that we see, right, 2 or 3 Tivit decks in a top 16 for a tournament, right? But you also see the one Florian player who keeps getting in there too, right? It's like the Tyan brothers who have taken a deck and built it up over a long time and are now getting these consistent placements, and now other people are taking the deck idea and getting those same placements.
That being said, Kentaro, which is probably a card.
Kentaro the smiling cat.
Yep.
I love that guy. He's terrible.
Will never be a viable cEDH deck. Like there's some things where it's just this is not good enough. But if you want to play Grolnok, if you want to play Gitrog, if you want to play...
Yeah, and just to be clear, I could have picked one of many decks on the database. I just kind of scrolled and my finger landed on Grolnok. I'm not trying to pick on Grolnok here.
Yeah.
Like, I hate all of you equally.
What's the one mono green deck where there are so many diehard fans of it? And
which one?
Yeva.
Yeah,
Yeva.
Yeah, if you want to play Yeva, you can play Yeva. There are...
Okay, what's his name? Needs to cover his ears like right now.
Just because you're not playing the top of the format doesn't mean you aren't playing cEDH. But there are certain things where you do need value from your commander. And that's okay. You can still play weird stuff. You can still play what you want to and have it be cEDH.
Mm-hmm. There are going to be trial and error periods, right? It's almost like a science. The cEDH, and I think Magic, thrives on ingenuity. It thrives on people being willing to explore. People who will take a card that's spoiled in a set and try to incorporate it or build around it and do something there. You've seen cards that people weren't high on, right? You've seen cards like Ka0s that was kind of a surprise hit for a good amount of time there.
Yeah. Look for the value in the commander and be willing to accept your losses, I'll say.
Mm-hmm. And recognize why the commanders that do well. And if you're not going to play them, at least recognize how you are going to emulate them as closely as possible.
I hope that this is a helpful tool. And as I said, we're going to be having much more slimmed down, so you don't have to watch an hour plus of content in order to get any value out of it. But I honestly am surprised with how wholesome this ended up turning out. And as I think we come to the end of our podcast episode, I think it's time to move on to something that, depending on how it turns out, may be less wholesome. So,
you talking about? We are a PG podcast.
We absolutely are.
PG-13 on a good day.
Fair. But yeah, I'm talking about our closing segment of Bed Wed Dead. So I think for this closing statement, I'm gonna go for resources as our Bed Wed Dead options. So EDH Top 16, the deck database, and I'm gonna go throw a spicy one in there with EDH Rec.
All right.
Which, mind you, we're not insulting any of these. All of these have value to them, but it's more fun if it's a challenge. So.
Right. Yeah, I don't want to denigrate anybody who works hard on any of these websites, but all right. So EDH Rec. EDH Rec is one of those websites that seems like it should be extremely useful, and it is. But if you are playing cEDH, you need to know how to use that, or you're not going to get good information out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Now, there's lots of different, ways to look at it. My favorite one is just filter by decks that include Mana Crypt, right? If a deck doesn't have Mana Crypt in it, it's almost certainly not cEDH. And if it does, it's probably not any worse than High Power. So if I want to see what kind of things people put in the deck when I'm brewing, or just trying to make changes to mine, sometimes I will go on cEDH Rec, or not cEDH Rec. Yeah, we need cEDH Rec. I will go on EDH Rec, and I'll filter by has Mana Crypt or something. And I've occasionally seen some cards in there that made me go, all right, maybe that's worth considering. So definitely not my go-to resource for building a cEDH deck, but it's one that can be useful. So I guess I'm going to bed EDH Rec. All right, the database. I have said a lot of things about the database in this podcast. I have not said all the things I planned on saying about the database in this podcast. I think every cEDH player kind of has a love-hate relationship with the place, right? When they put your deck on, they're the best people in the world. When they don't, they're the scum of the earth, right? We've all been there. I've been there. But the thing is, people wouldn't react that way if they didn't care. Right. For all people like to crap on the decklist database when they don't do exactly what they want, they're still there. Right. It is an absolute indispensable resource for finding out what people are doing in the format. Whether it's good or not, of course, is another story. And if you're trying to get into a deck, like when I'm trying to pick up a new deck, the first thing I do is go on the database and see what the existing deck lists are. And I find the one I like best. And I generally play a few games without changing it, maybe make some very minor changes until I understand it. But that is my go-to website for picking up a new deck or building a new deck. So, and yes, they say, a productive marriage has few but very productive fights. I feel like that basically describes the decklist database every 3 months or so. So yeah, I'm going to wed the decklist database, I suppose. Which means no knock on them, but EDH Top 16, honestly, it's just not a website I use. Like, I follow a couple of tournament series, obviously Ka0s, a few others. I know where to go to see which decks are performing well. I don't really feel like I need that information aggregated for me. I feel like I have a pretty good idea of the kind of decks that are regularly doing well in tournaments without them, formalizing it. Now, I'm all about formalizing data and putting that information in one place. But to me, that is the least useful resource out of the three for deck building and deck playing purposes. So no knock on them. I'm glad they exist. I think they're picking up a lot of slack on what the database used to be, and that's good. But I don't personally have a lot of use for what they're doing right now. So I guess that means I'm deading EDH Top 16.
I did not expect that. We're bringing out the spice. A whole lot of people swear by EDH Top 16, but man, we are bringing out the spice here. I'll hop in, and I'll start with, I'll say the easy one. The deck database as you were saying, there's kind of a love-hate relationship there. For me, it was a great thing to look at when I first started out, and I'll still occasionally go back to it, but it is not something that I really rely on. It's not something that I'm looking at all the time. It's just something I occasionally hit up, and for that reason, it will in fact be my bet. And now is where people get upset, as I will be marrying EDH Rec. I think...
Oh, I'm the spicy one.
Listen, I said we had some spice. I didn't say it was just from you. I think EDH Rec, yeah, as you were saying, it's you have to know how to use it when you're going to build cEDH. But there are so many things where it's like, I have never thought of that card, and then I see it in EDH Rec, and I'm like, ooh, that actually works really well for this deck. And I think EDH Rec, whenever I'm going and brewing and I'm starting to be like, is there anything that I'm forgetting? Is there anything spicy that I could include here? EDH Rec is where I go. Because, yeah, you can pretty much always get your staples of the format from wherever. I mean, the deck database is a great place for that. But if you're looking for something spicy, the EDH Rec is a great place for it. And having some little added spice to my life is something nice. And that means we are deading the top 16 twice. Oh, man. Neko, I hope you make it where we don't get a bunch of hate comments off of this.
So, to disappoint everyone here and to spark the flames, EDH Rec is wonderful. It's beautiful, right? Because where else are you going to have all of the commanders that you can play in Commander, and cEDH specifically, listed out based on their color? If you want to build an Esper deck, you can go onto the site, look at the commanders, find the one that matches you, and build from there. Also, if you do have a commander and you're ever curious about, you're out of the loop, what new spices come out for this commander, they have a dedicated new stuff section, right? You can see the new cards in the set that maybe work with what you're trying to do. I just find that very, 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 very valuable. And yeah, it's not always the best recommendations. They don't show you everything, but they show you enough to get started. And I think that starting point can't be overlooked. So I am actually going to wed EDH Rec.
Dang.
All right, now.
Oh, too spicy for me.
The database. Have y'all ever heard of Tinder? So you go.
No, what's that?
Well, let me tell you. If you go onto the database, right, you see all these options. You're kind of going through. Maybe you check out the profile. Maybe you swipe one, right? And you're like, oh, this is interesting. I'll try it out. And yeah, you see some cool stuff. Maybe you take something home, right? One night stand, and maybe it turns into something long term. Maybe you can form something there. But for now, we're just going to bed the database. And if the database is Tinder, then EDH Top 16 is Grinder, because that is just it's useful, right? If you want to see what's
for tournament grinders, right?
So.
For tournament grinders.
Exactly.
Tournament grinder, yeah, we need that social media app.
See, Fetch knew exactly what I was talking about. But right, like, it's again, you can check everything out. You can see what's on top, see what's in your area, right? And kind of go from there.
And on bottom.
Yeah, exactly. You can filter it, and very useful resource. But I think that it requires the most keen eye and knowledge about cEDH to fully recognize, right? Because now you're sorting by players who are doing well for the deck, and you have to figure out what's working for them with that deck. You have to not be tricked by the convergence percentage of certain decks. And I think that for our purposes, right, for people who are in the community more so, who are making content based around tournament results, it's a very, very useful tool for that. But in the context of entry-level cEDH community resources, out of the three, it's the one I definitely have to dead.
Wow. Oh man, we're gonna have a whole lot of people.
Have we ever all deaded the same thing before?
I think it's happened once, but man,
Maybe.
we're gonna have a whole lot of people upset at us for this. Oh.
It's no malice, it's just out of those three.
It's a great resource.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, people are gonna get the pitchforks. We're canceled, it's too late. But that brings us to the end of our episode. Wow. I hope that everyone enjoyed. I hope that you liked watching. If you did and you're not subscribed already, please subscribe and give us a like, all that stuff. Go press the buttons. You know what to do. And thank you to all of our patrons, especially Frenchie at our Feldar Guardian tier, as well as the Exterminator, Suzu, Tax Auditor, and that Mandu. Couldn't do it without you. Couldn't do it without all of our supporters, not just our patrons, but also our viewers. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like the episode, honestly, show this to someone who's starting to get into the format. I mean, I'm just saying, it's an option. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
See ya.